Hi, Sayville parents and community. My name is Stephen Hill. I'm the founder of Speak Sobriety. For the past 9 years, I've been going around to middle schools, high schools, colleges, different community events, sharing my story about my personal struggles with mental health, substance use, and ultimately the journey to recovery. I had the pleasure of speaking at Sayville Middle School in March of 2024, last school year. I was just at the high school in November speaking with the sophomores and juniors. I'm going to be back at the high school in May of 2025 speaking with the seniors. And I do assembly presentations where, like when I just came to the high school, I spoke with all the sophomores and juniors, and I got to meet with some of them in small group breakout sessions. And one of the questions that was asked by a student was, are you going to share your story with your kids one day, and how are you going to talk to your kids about drugs and alcohol? Now, I've only been a father for 2 years. I have a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old, so obviously we're not having those conversations yet, but it's something I certainly think about. And so the answer is yes, I am going to share my story about my struggles with mental health and substance use with my children. First of all, because of genetics, genetic predisposition, right? If addiction runs in your family, you are more likely to develop an addiction. Now, it's not determinative either way. If addiction doesn't run in your family, it doesn't mean it can't happen to you, but if it does, you have a higher risk. It's just the way that our brains react to substances. Some people have certain genes where you take a substance and you're like, yeah, I don't really like this. Next person takes it and they're like, yeah, I like it, but like I don't need to do this every single day. And then someone like me takes it and you're just like, go, go, go. I want it every single day. And so the genetics is definitely something to take into account. Now, there's three other factors as well that we talk about. Number two is your psychology, that's your mental health. Do you have mental health struggles? So I had ADHD growing up. Things like ADHD, depression, anxiety make you more vulnerable to addiction. In the simplest terms, I don't like the way that I feel. What's a easy way to change that feeling? And that's take a substance. They may be influenced by an older peer. They're depressed. They're anxious. They have ADHD. They feel like they have three conversations going on in their brain at the same time. And they take a substance and they get relief for a short period of time until that substance wears off. And now their problem is still there, but a little bit worse. And so what do? They try the substance again, except this time they don't get the same relief because now they're starting at a lower level. And eventually your body builds such a tolerance to it that you get no relief and your problems are significantly worse than they were when you took that first drink or that first drug, right? So those are the two factors we take into account first. It's your genetics, that's your biology. It's your psychology, that's your mental health. And number three is your environment, your surroundings. Do you grow up with it in your family? Are your friends doing it? So fortunate for me, although addiction certainly runs on my father's side of the family, I didn't grow up in it. Meaning my mother, my father, they were not people who used drugs. They certainly drank alcohol socially, but it was never a problem. But I was elevated to play on the JV lacrosse team as an eighth grader. So I was a middle school student playing a high school sport, and I was with these older kids. And unfortunately, at that time, the culture of the team was not very good as it relates to drugs and alcohol. And so at 13 years old, I tried my first substance, which is the fourth factor we take into account is when did you start using? Because the female brain isn't fully developed till 25, the male brain's even closer to 30 years old. And so those are all things you have to talk about with your kids. Genetics, right? Psychology, your environment, and when did you start using? Now, when I was asked this question and I was thinking about some of the things on how I'm going to talk to my kids about this further, but it's more than just talking. It's about leading by example and not with just drugs, with alcohol too. I think we're at fault for even saying it that way. We say drugs and alcohol or alcohol and drugs. We put every drug into one category and we give alcohol its own special category, and students look at alcohol very differently because of it. Yet, in my opinion, alcohol causes more problems than some of these other drugs do. And so ensuring that you're leading by example with not just substances like drugs, alcohol is a drug, but include alcohol in that as well. And I'm not saying you can never drink alcohol in front of your kids, but I think there's a difference between having one beer or a glass of wine every now and then and getting drunk in front of your kids or sending your 9-year-old to the cooler to go fetch you a White Claw. I mean, I see it happening. I think there's a big difference between those two. What I've learned just working in this field on both the prevention and recovery side of it is you've got to make your expectations very clear from the beginning. This is not something that's acceptable in our home. You're not doing it in like a very strict and overbearing way because that doesn't work either. You can't be that parent where your kids fear you more than the consequences of drugs and alcohol. And so you make your expectations clear, but got to show some flex too because kids make mistakes and they're exposed to negative influence and temptation. If they make that mistake, you want them to come to you before it turns into a major problem. But if they're so scared they try and hide it, which is really what I did a good job of my freshman year, is I hid my drug and alcohol use. By the time my parents really figured it out, I was already addicted to marijuana. So, making those expectations clear, leading by example, following through on consequences. And I do get, and it's interesting, I'm going to be speaking with the seniors soon, I do get parents who will ask me about seniors who are going off to college and teaching them how to drink responsibly. And I understand that mindset. There are some parents that say to me, well, I don't want my kid to go off to college. I hear these stories where kids have no experience with drinking alcohol and they go off to college and they end up in the emergency room for alcohol poisoning because they didn't know how to handle all the freedom and their peers could handle more than them. Yes, of course that does happen, but most kids who grow up with parents who let them know that alcohol is not acceptable for them to drink, they continue that healthy habit into college. I'm not saying that they're never going to try alcohol, but as soon as you give the okay for them to drink alcohol, basically what you've done is you've made out a check to them. You've signed it and you said, go cash it, go drink. That's what you can do. And if you take into account all those things I said before, like the genetics, the mental health struggles, the environment, the age of first use, even if you try and control that, you may fail based on that person's individual biology, psychology, environment, and when they actually started to use. And so it's very important to remember that you're not your kid's friend. I see a lot of parents struggle with that as well, and just making it clear that this is just not something that's acceptable to us. Some of them may try it, but holding that line and setting that boundary is a very important thing. So I'm looking forward to coming back to Sayville in May. If anyone has any further questions, my website is speaksobriety.com. Feel free to reach out anytime. Thanks.